Welcome to our spine-chilling journey, where the dark secrets of America's most haunted cemeteries will be unveiled. Tonight, we'll venture deep into the shadows, where restless spirits linger, and every step you take could awaken terrifying entities from the beyond. To make sure you don't miss any tales in this mysterious adventure, be sure to like, share, and follow our channel. And now, steel yourself, because the spirits in this story are waiting for you. Halloween night. The air outside is still, with a chilling breeze slipping through the door cracks. I just set my coffee down on the table when I heard a knock at the door. I shivered, glancing at the clock. Almost midnight. Who would come by at this hour? I opened the door, but there was no one there. Only darkness and an eerie chill in the air. Looking down, I noticed an envelope placed neatly on the doorstep. A black envelope with a brief message. Be prepared. And remember, once you begin, there is no turning back. A shiver ran down my spine as I picked up the envelope. Before I could wonder who had sent it, the lights in my room flickered, as though an unseen hand had brushed against the switch. My heart racing, I went back inside and slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a map, marked with 10 locations scattered across the US, famous haunted cemeteries. A blood-red inscription glared from the corner of the map. Begin the journey if you dare. Bachelor's Grove awaits you tomorrow night. I sat there, staring at the map. Bachelor's Grove. I'd heard of it. An old cemetery outside Chicago, known for wandering spirits and ghostly whispers on moonless nights. Locals say that if you're brave enough to enter after dark, you might encounter the Lady in White, the most famous ghost of Bachelor's Grove. But encountering her is rarely a pleasant experience. I wondered, who would send me this terrifying invitation? And why me? But a strange curiosity ignited within me. Sometimes, warnings have a magnetic pull on those drawn to the unknown. Maybe that was my reasoning, or maybe it was just my way of justifying the insane journey I felt compelled to take. The following night, I drove out of the city, through stretches of forest and along desolate roads. My car's headlights were the only light piercing the thick darkness. The silence was dense, and the road seemed endless, occasionally shrouded in mist swirling under the beams. As I arrived at the gates of Bachelor's Grove, my heart pounded heavily. The cemetery lay quiet, like a forgotten corner of time. I stepped through the old iron gates, each step feeling heavier. A sharp gust of wind chilled me to the bone, carrying the earthy scent of damp leaves. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I cast its beam over rows of mossy tombstones. The sound of my footsteps echoed on the damp ground. But then, I realized something was off. Footsteps. I wasn't the only one. I froze, listening. The footsteps continued, heavy, steady, as though someone was drawing closer. I whipped around, aiming the light behind me. There was no one. I laughed nervously, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was just an echo, a trick of the imagination. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of something white. It was there, in the far corner of the cemetery, standing silently just a few yards away. I held my breath, trying to stay calm as my flashlight illuminated the figure. A woman in a long white dress. Her face obscured, but one thing was certain, she did not belong to this world. I stood frozen, unable to look away from the white figure. Everything around me fell eerily silent. She slowly turned her head toward me, as though recognizing an intruder. I heard a strange whisper, an odd sound echoing in my head, sweet yet sinister. And then, suddenly, she was gone. No trace, no sound, but the feeling of being watched, of something dark surrounding me, remained. My heart raced, my limbs numb with cold. I turned and fled, running toward the gate as though something was pulling me back with every step. As I scrambled into my car, I saw her again in the rearview mirror. She stood beside the cemetery gates, as if waiting for me to return. But I didn't look back. I didn't have the courage. I sped away, leaving Bachelor's Grove and its ghost behind, swallowed by the night. But the most haunting part wasn't the ghostly figure in the cemetery. It was the small line I discovered after I got home, written in red ink on the map I'd forgotten in my terror. Welcome to the journey. See you at St. Louis #1 tomorrow night. A chill spread from my fingertips through my entire body. Bachelor's Grove was only the beginning, a ghostly handshake leading to nightmares more terrifying than I could imagine. The morning sunlight streamed through the window as I woke up, but the relief of seeing daylight didn't last long. Beside my bed lay the map with last night's red message still glaring. See you at St. Louis #1 tomorrow night. All day, I couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that I was being watched. I hadn't forgotten the lady in white from Bachelor's Grove, but now something else, something stronger, was drawing me toward the next cemetery. St. Louis #1 sits in the heart of New Orleans, surrounded by old brick walls and towering iron gates. This ancient cemetery has stood for hundreds of years. But the most terrifying thing about it isn't the age, it's the name tied to this place, Marie Laveau. New Orleans' most powerful voodoo queen. I arrived in New Orleans at sunset, with the soft golden light casting shadows over the city's cobblestone streets, winding like veins through its ancient heart. Despite the bustling crowd, I couldn't shake the chill as I drew closer to St. Louis #1. There are countless stories of Marie Laveau, tales of her spirit still roaming the crypts, refusing to relinquish her power. They say if you dare leave a prayer at her tomb, she might appear, but don't expect a kind look. As I stepped into the cemetery, a strange sensation washed over me. Unlike the deserted Bachelor's Grove, this place was packed with tombs, covered in moss and marked by crosses and voodoo symbols. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of earth and something that resembled incense, or something far stranger. My flashlight's dim beam barely reached a few feet ahead, its yellowish glow cutting through the thickening shadows. I tried not to look around, avoiding the feeling that if I looked too closely, I might find someone staring back. My footsteps echoed in the stillness, and I felt an odd presence as though something was watching from every shadow. I passed rows of crypts, finally stopping in front of Marie Laveau's tomb, a tall, imposing structure covered with overlapping X's, carved by those who had come seeking her aid. My hand instinctively touched one of the X marks, and in that instant, a chilling breeze swept through, forcing me to pull back. A faint sound whispered in the wind, a murmur I couldn't make out. It felt like a voice was close, too close. Although the words were unintelligible, just a sensation, a sound that reached deep into my subconscious. It hasn't even begun. I stepped back, but the air grew heavier. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered and went dark. I tried to turn it back on, but nothing happened. The night had fallen completely, and only darkness surrounded me. My heartbeat thundered in my chest as silence filled the cemetery. Then, somewhere nearby, came the soft sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, as if someone was approaching. I spun around, searching in every direction, but only darkness greeted me. Yet the footsteps drew closer, closer still. Then I felt a cold hand graze my shoulder. "Marie," I whispered, barely able to form the word, uncertain why I'd even spoken her name. A low, eerie laugh echoed in the air, deep and resonant as if rising from beneath the earth, soft but icy. I couldn't see her, but the feeling was unmistakable. Someone stood behind me, watching the back of my neck. My breath froze, and I couldn't turn around. The voices grew louder, whispers that were strange, not of this world. The voices of those who had once worshipped Marie Laveau, souls who had called on her in life. A single voice rang out, sharp and commanding, "Don't turn around." My heart hammered so violently it felt like it might burst. This wasn't a warning, it was an order. An order from a force far beyond anything I'd known. I was paralyzed, my legs refusing to move. I wanted to run, to escape, but invisible threads seemed to bind me in place. A freezing breath brushed against my neck, and this time, a whisper, clear and dangerously close, echoed, "She's been waiting." I bolted, too afraid to look back. Marie's sharp, haunting laughter trailed me through the darkness. I raced toward the cemetery gates, each step feeling like I was moving through sinking sand. As I reached the rusted gates, it felt like I was finally free of something. But when I glanced back one last time, I saw a figure standing near the tomb, a woman in a red scarf. Her gaze fixed on me from the shadows. I climbed into my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I sped away, not daring to look back. But once I reached home, the map lay waiting on my table, with a new message scrawled beneath it in that same blood-red ink: "Hollywood forever awaits." I slammed the door, trying to shake the memory of that laughter and the image of the woman in the red scarf. But her figure clung to my thoughts, every second, and in my mind, A creeping fear was growing, an overwhelming sense that I had awakened something. And now it would never let me go. Only hours ago, I could still hear the chilling laughter of Marie Laveau, her voice lingering in every corner of St. Louis number 1. But as soon as I left New Orleans, a strange urge pulled me to the next location, Hollywood forever. As night fell over Los Angeles, the cemetery revealed itself in its haunting beauty. Hollywood forever is unlike any other cemetery. Nestled in the heart of the city, it's the resting place of countless famous stars. People who once captivated the world but are now quietly forgotten. They say that if the night is still enough, you can hear laughter and whispers from the ghosts. As if the old glamour still lingers somewhere in the shadows. The gates stood open, welcoming me with a cold, unnatural breeze. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the silence like a warning. Rows of headstones stretched before me, with a few large tombs bearing the names of legendary stars. The dim street lights cast long shadows over the ground. The atmosphere was chilling, to say the least. My flashlight barely lit the ground a few feet ahead, while the darkness swallowed everything else. As I ventured deeper, I began to notice strange things. In a distant corner of the cemetery, through a thin veil of fog, I saw a figure. I froze, squinting to see more clearly. It was a woman in a long, 1920s-era dress, with wavy hair and a wide-brimmed hat. She stood with her back to me, completely still. Her dress swayed gently as if caught by the wind, but tonight, there was no wind at all. My heart pounded as she slowly turned to face me, her eyes glinting in the dim light, empty, dark, and hollow, as though she wasn't looking at me but straight through me. Terror filled me, yet my legs refused to move. I was rooted in place, forced to confront her. She parted her lips, but instead of words, all that came out was a faint sound, like the crackling of an old film reel, the hissing of a movie screen flickering to life. Her gaze was fixed on me, and a distant whisper echoed in my mind. They're still watching, all those who dare to step in here. As if yanked by an invisible force, I turned and began to run, leaving the woman's ghostly figure behind. But after only a few steps, another shadow appeared ahead, a man in a black suit. His face gaunt, eyes pale and unseeing. He stood blocking my path, his mouth frozen in a smirk as though performing for an audience. There was no sound, only a mad, unsettling laughter ringing in my mind. All I could do was back away. But more figures began to emerge, lining up to watch my every move. It was like a performance of the dead, a cast of former stars now forever trapped between fame and darkness. Those hollow faces, with their empty eyes and twisted smiles, broke the last of my courage. I turned and ran, my footsteps pounding through the night like a frantic drumbeat. But somehow, the cemetery seemed endless, with no way out. Every path led to more rows of graves, more shadows waiting in silence. Watching, the air grew heavier, suffocating, like an unseen force squeezing the life out of me from within. As I wandered deeper into the cemetery, a particular headstone caught my eye, engraved with a familiar name, my own. My hand shook as I reached out to touch the cold stone, every cell in my body freezing with dread. How was this possible? Just then, a chill swept over me, and the woman's laughter echoed behind me once more. She was right there, her empty eyes staring down, her lips moving as though she were about to whisper something. I couldn't hear her, but a single word echoed clearly in my mind. Cold and unyielding, destiny. My flashlight suddenly went dead, leaving me in total darkness. In the silence, I heard footsteps slowly approaching. Shadows emerged from all directions, closing in around me, their whispers and laughter blending into a haunting symphony. An improvisation of Hollywood's lost souls. They stopped only a few steps away, their eyes shining with an unsettling glow, their pale lips forming words I couldn't understand. With no other option, I closed my eyes, fighting the terror overwhelming my mind. The whispers of the spirits around me grew louder, merging into a single message, repeating over and over. We all end up here. I opened my eyes to find myself surrounded by a crowd of these ghostly figures. I don't know what happened next. I don't remember how I got out of the cemetery. All I know is that when I returned to my car, the map lay waiting in the passenger seat, with a new message in chilling red ink. See you at Resurrection Cemetery. This time, there was no curiosity, no urge, only a growing fear that with each cemetery, each name on a headstone. I was becoming part of a story that would never end. My car glided down the dark road, its headlights slicing through the cold night. Resurrection Cemetery. I'd heard the stories. Tales of the ghostly girl named Mary. They call her Resurrection Mary. The young woman forever wandering the road to her grave, hitchhiking along Archer Avenue, but no one has ever seen her make it home. I still hadn't shaken the chills from Hollywood Forever. The image of those hollow-eyed phantoms, the empty smiles, and the haunting laughter of the woman from that night clung to me like a shadow. But Resurrection Cemetery lay ahead, like an open door inviting me to cross over. As I approached, the cemetery loomed in the darkness, dim streetlights casting a faint glow over its grounds. Resurrection Cemetery was silent, draped in a cold fog. I stepped out of my car, the chill sinking deep into my bones. This didn't feel like a place of rest, more than that. It felt like a place where the past lurked, watching every step of those who wandered. Passing through the old iron gates, I stopped, my eyes scanning the shadows within. My flashlight pierced only a few feet ahead, revealing rows of headstones standing at attention, cold and still like silent sentinels. I followed a narrow gravel path, my footsteps crunching on the stones. And then, I wasn't alone anymore. A white figure appeared in the distance. She stood quietly among the graves, her long hair cascading over her shoulders, her bare feet peeking out from beneath a white dress. Resurrection Mary. My heart pounded as I clenched the flashlight so tightly my hands ached. She was gazing into the night, her face tilted with a sorrowful, haunting expression. I called out, my voice hoarse in the dead silence. Mary? The girl turned. Her eyes were hollow, empty, but there was a sadness in them that defied explanation. She drifted toward me, her steps so light it was as if she floated just above the ground. I wanted to run, but my feet were frozen in place, held by some invisible force. Her gaze locked onto mine, and as she drew closer, I heard a whisper, as cold as death, murmur in my ear, "Can you take me home?" Her fingers stretched out toward me, her pale skin ghostly in the dim light, as though she were from another world. I took a shaky breath, reaching my hand out, but just as our fingers were about to touch, a chilling gust swept over me. Mary vanished, dissolving into the night like smoke. I looked around, but she was gone, yet in front of me, the iron gate had somehow swung shut. I rushed to it, trying to force it open, but it refused to budge. The sound of footsteps echoed, and I turned. Mary was back, standing just a few feet away. She stared at me with those dark, empty eyes, as if drawing me deeper into the cemetery. Then, a cold hand touched my shoulder from behind. I spun around, but no one was there. My breath hitched, and then I heard laughter, soft and sinister, laced with a dark allure. It wasn't Mary's voice, but others, spirits lingering within this haunted cemetery. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape, but my feet felt like they were cemented to the ground. Mary drifted closer, her dark eyes fixed on me, her lips moving slightly. I heard her voice again, whispering from a distant place, "You'll never leave this place." Her whisper was not hers alone, it mingled with a chorus of voices, each one from a soul long forgotten. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, only a cold terror consuming me completely. I don't remember how I escaped Resurrection Cemetery. Only the echo of laughter and her whispered words as I dashed to my car and sped away like a fugitive. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw Mary's figure, standing quietly by the gates, her eyes still watching me. When I made it home, I slammed the door shut, trying to block out the terrifying images still lingering in my mind. But on the table, that black map awaited me, with a fresh, blood-red line etched across it, sharp as a knife. Bonaventure awaits. A chill crawled down my spine, and I knew Resurrection Mary was only the beginning. I drove into Savannah at dusk, the ancient city casting a mysterious, dreamlike beauty, known for its haunted tales. Bonaventure Cemetery is one of Savannah's most chilling landmarks. Part of me wanted to turn back and abandon this entire journey, but a strange compulsion, and the map, urged me forward, even though I knew the price might be my own peace of mind. By the time I arrived at Bonaventure, the night had fully descended, and weak moonlight filtered through the Spanish moss draping from the oak trees. A coldness permeated the air, and the gentle rustling of leaves sounded like whispered secrets in the darkness. The towering oaks that covered the cemetery created an eerie, haunting atmosphere, a scene straight out of a nightmare. The narrow path winding into the cemetery was faintly illuminated, dotted with the long shadows of the crosses in the ground. I walked deeper into the chilling silence, the cold seeping through my skin. The cemetery was unnaturally quiet, a silence that made me feel as if each step was a declaration, disturbing the restless souls within. Moss-covered tombstones lined the path like silent sentinels. Every so often, I'd stop, feeling as if unseen eyes were watching me from the shadows. I froze as I spotted a statue of an angel in the distance. Wings spread wide, the moon casting an almost mournful expression on its face. Though the angel's eyes were made of stone, it felt as if they were looking directly at me. Observing, judging, I shuddered and took a step back, shining my flashlight behind me. And I realized, the angel wasn't the only one. A faint figure stood among the oaks, a young girl in an old-fashioned white dress. Her hollow eyes stared straight at me, filled with a deep sadness, as though she was searching for something lost long ago. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat, and I backed away in horror. When I dared to look again, she was gone, leaving only a cold wind that brushed against my hair. I forced myself to stay calm, but as I continued walking, I heard soft laughter, like the wind passing through the trees. The space around me seemed to blur, the oak trees leaning closer into the path, as though trying to enclose me. I heard whispers, a gentle but haunting invitation. "Stay with us?" My palms were clammy, and I wasn't sure if I should keep going or turn back. Just then, a strong gust of wind blew, swirling dry leaves around my feet, and I saw the girl's figure appear again, closer this time. Her eyes, though hollow, were filled with an indescribable sorrow and pain. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but her voice echoed right beside my ear, soft and eerily sweet. "Have you seen my mother?" My heart pounded as I shook my head, unable to answer. She remained there, her empty gaze piercing through me. Then, she raised her hand, pointing toward another part of the cemetery, her lips forming words I couldn't understand. Unable to resist, I followed where she pointed. The winding path led me deeper into the cemetery, with only patches of moonlight filtering through the thick canopy above. Then, I reached an old grave. A statue of a grieving woman knelt beside it, hands lifted to the heavens in an eternal plea for mercy. The girl stood beside the grave, clutching the statue's hand, her eyes glistening, not with ordinary tears, but with blood-red drops streaming down her cheeks, creating a horrifying sight in the dim light. She looked at me one last time, and I heard her choked whisper, "Stay here, with me, forever?" Suddenly, a deafening roar erupted from somewhere, like the wind but deeper and more forceful, drowning out every other sound. The mighty oaks around me trembled, leaves rustling violently as if hiding something darker. I jerked the flashlight toward the trees, catching glimpses of shadows shifting. Though no one was there, I stepped back, my legs moving faster until I was running. Wild laughter and haunting whispers followed me with every step. I didn't dare look back, I just knew I had to get out of there. As I reached the cemetery gate, gasping for breath, I looked back one last time. The girl stood beneath a large oak, her empty eyes following me with a haunting sadness. I scrambled into my car, started the engine, and sped off without a second glance. But in the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of her shadowy figure lingering among the trees, her hollow gaze tracking me until I was out of sight. Back at home, I was nearly too exhausted to move, but the black map lay on the table as though it had been waiting. A new line had appeared, written in a deep, blood-red script. "Old burying point awaits." I sat there, realizing that whatever awaited me at the next cemetery would be even worse. The ghosts never sleep. Salem, just the name alone conjures images of a haunted town, filled with restless spirits who will never find peace. This town's history is cloaked in darkness, the deep, unforgiving shadow of pain and injustice left by the witch trials. And tonight, I was about to step into the heart of that darkness, Old Burying Point Cemetery. Night had fully settled by the time I arrived in Salem, a quiet town bathed in cold moonlight. Old Burying Point appeared through the thick fog, the ancient graves casting shadows in the dim light. Crossing through the cemetery gates, I felt a chill and an oppressive weight in the air, as if the past buried here was wrapping itself around each step I took. My footsteps echoed softly, blending with the rustling of dry leaves. I turned on my flashlight, but its beam barely reached a few feet ahead, leaving everything else in mysterious darkness. The rows of tombstones stood like silent sentries, covered in moss and worn by time. The names on them faded and nearly erased after hundreds of years. As I ventured further in, a cold wind swept through, carrying with it a pungent, ancient odor, like the breath of spirits that had slumbered too long. Suddenly, I heard faint whispers. They sounded like muted prayers, echoing in the unnaturally quiet cemetery. We were innocent? A chill crept down my spine. The whisper wasn't just one voice but many, men and women. Old and young, the restless souls of Salem, victims of the witch trials, seemed to be gathering around me, unwilling to accept the cruel fate they'd been given. I pressed on, and in the dim light, I saw a figure standing among the graves. A woman with long black hair, dressed in a worn, dark dress. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with an unyielding resentment. She stared at me, her gaze so fierce it felt as though she was tearing me apart with her eyes alone. "Do you know?" she whispered, her voice soft yet haunting, echoing in my mind like a waking nightmare. We were never forgiven, falsely accused, cursed, condemned, without a word of explanation. I couldn't speak, only stare at her, feeling as if each word she spoke was squeezing the life out of me. She drifted closer, her feet barely touching the ground, her dark dress billowing in the mist. I stepped back, unable to look away. With each step she took, my heart pounded harder, her dark eyes piercing deep into my soul, embedding within me the rage of the afterlife. Then, I felt other eyes on me. I turned to see dozens of shadowy figures standing among the tombstones. Their faces pale and somber, men and women, all with hollow eyes, their expressions filled with sorrow and bitterness, as if they had never found rest. A cold wind suddenly surged through the cemetery, and the whispers from the spirits began to merge into one dark, resonant curse. "You cannot save us, but you will not escape either." I could hardly breathe. The spirits closed in around me, their faces twisted with anger, hands reaching out from the shadows as if they were ready to drag me down with them. I turned to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if the ground itself was determined to hold me in place. At that moment, my flashlight flickered and went out, leaving me standing in darkness, my breath coming in gasps. In my mind, the spirits' whispers echoed on, a chanting of the condemned. We were innocent, and we will never rest. In my panic, I felt a cold hand lightly touch my shoulder. I jerked, turning to find the woman in the black dress standing right next to me. Her eyes filled with wrath, staring deep into mine. "You will share our fate," she whispered, her voice low and filled with malice. Without another thought, I bolted, sprinting through the tombstones and the spirits, their curses and screams following me. I didn't dare look back, terrified of what I might see. Reaching the edge of the cemetery, I jumped into my car, hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. As I drove out of Salem, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the woman in the black dress standing far behind, her eyes burning with fury, watching me with an intensity that would haunt me. Back home, I collapsed in exhaustion, only to see the black map lying on the table. But this time, there was no red writing. Instead, a line of blood trailed across it, smeared and ominous. "Union Cemetery, prepare yourself." I closed my eyes, feeling as though I was being pulled into an endless nightmare. The spirits of Salem had let me go, but their curse still lingered, each word piercing my soul like thorns. And I knew I would never escape these spirits. The night was pitch black as I entered Union Cemetery, the infamous resting place in Easton, Connecticut. A chilling breeze from the nearby lake swept through, carrying a dampness and faint earthy scent. The stories of the White Lady, the ghostly woman in white who appears each nightfall, have become legend over the years. And tonight, I was set to face her. The iron gate creaked as I pushed it open, the harsh sound breaking the eerie silence. Stepping inside, I felt as if I'd crossed into another realm. This cemetery wasn't like any I'd visited before. The air here was heavy and thick, as if the sorrow and resentment of the spirits lingered around me. Wrapping around each step, The faint beam of my flashlight barely penetrated the dense darkness of Union Cemetery. I walked past rows of headstones, each step echoing through the stillness. Each stone served as a reminder of lives long gone, but something in the air told me that not all were at rest. A cold gust brushed the back of my neck, feeling like a gentle touch, but when I turned, there was only darkness. Then I found myself standing before an old grave, the moss-covered headstone barely legible. As I looked closer, a sense of unease crept over me when I saw a faint, reddish footprint beside it, a small footprint. Before I could process this, a misty figure began to materialize in the distance. White Lady. Her name escaped my lips in terror. There she stood, her white dress flowing around her feet like mist, her long dark hair obscuring much of her face. Her arms hung lifelessly at her sides, cold and unmoving as if she were carved from stone. I couldn't see her face clearly, but her eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, seemed to pierce right through me, as if pulling at my very soul. She began to move toward me, each step soundless and measured. With each step closer, my heart tightened, an unspeakable fear gripping every inch of me. I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen, trapped by an unseen force. Then, from the shadows, a whisper filled the air, a soft but haunting voice echoing through the graveyard. "Have you seen my child?" I couldn't find my voice. Her question felt like a dagger to my mind, leaving an ache I couldn't describe. She continued to move closer, her empty eyes filled with endless sorrow. "My child," her voice quivered, full of despair. "Where is he?" I had no answer. Only fear gripped me, drowning me in the sorrow of a mother's loss. She was right in front of me, so close I could feel the freezing air radiating from her. She lifted her hand, her pale, cold fingers reaching toward me like those of the dead. And then, a powerful gust of wind blew through, and she vanished, dissolving into the darkness. I exhaled, thinking the nightmare was over. But then I saw another figure, small, standing just a short distance away. It was a young boy, perhaps 6 or 7, his face pale, his dark eyes staring straight at me. I realized he was her son. The boy reached out his hand as if to lead me somewhere, his sad eyes reflecting a world of despair and pain. I couldn't move, frozen by the intensity of his gaze. He whispered, "Mother." His voice echoed through the cemetery, a cry from a lost soul seeking peace. The word lingered, but it was not his voice alone. One by one, other spirits began to appear, surrounding me in an inescapable circle. They drew closer, step by step, their pale faces and hollow eyes illuminated by the moonlight. All around me, the whisper grew louder, until it became a single unified chant. "Mother." I could hardly breathe. This wasn't a child's call. It was the desperate plea of souls who would never find rest. They moved closer, cold hands reaching toward me, pulling me deeper into the circle of darkness. At that moment, a fierce wind surged around me, and I felt a push from an unseen hand. I stumbled backward, my flashlight falling to the ground. When I looked up, I found myself outside the cemetery gate. The spirits watched me in silence, their faces shadowed. The White Lady stood at the forefront, her eyes filled with sorrow and anger, staring as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. I scrambled to my feet, rushing back to my car, my heart racing and my breath uneven. As I glanced back one last time, I saw the White Lady's figure dissolve into the mist, leaving a lasting chill in my soul. When I reached home, the black map still lay on the table. This time, a new message appeared in bold, threatening script. "Green wood awaits." I sank into my chair, feeling the weight of horror and exhaustion pressing down on me. The spirits of Union Cemetery had let me leave, but I knew I was only sinking deeper into a nightmare from which there would be no escape. Rain began to fall as I arrived in Brooklyn. Greenwood Cemetery loomed through the misty rain, its ancient trees draped with green moss, casting a dark and mysterious atmosphere over the old graves. The air was damp and heavy, as if the cemetery itself had absorbed the coldness of the night. The map in my hand had led me right. This was the next destination. Greenwood, a place known for its restless spirits. I passed through the large, ornate iron gates, worn by time and weather. The silence was so profound I could hear each raindrop and my own shallow breaths. My flashlight cast a faint glow down the winding paths among gray stone markers. The entire cemetery felt like a maze within the rain, obscuring my view of anything beyond a few feet. As I moved deeper inside, I heard faint footsteps behind me. I spun around, sweeping the flashlight over the cold gravestones. There was no one there, yet the sound continued, steady and slow, as though someone was shadowing each of my steps. Looking down, I noticed small footprints pressed into the wet ground, leading directly toward a small pond nestled in the cemetery Del Water, where many had claimed to see strange apparitions floating on the surface. I followed the footprints, a chill creeping over me as I approached the pond. The water lay still, and my flashlight cast a faint light across its dark, bottomless surface. I felt as though countless unseen eyes were staring up from below. But the darkness prevented me from seeing anything clearly. Suddenly, a gust of wind rippled the water's surface, and I saw a shadowy figure appear on it. It was the image of a man. He wore a black suit with a neatly buttoned shirt, his face blank, his cold eyes fixed on me as though he intended to drag me into the endless darkness of the pond. I tried to look away, but his gaze seemed to hold me captive, his eyes growing darker and deeper with each second, as if leading me into a place with no escape. In a flash, I felt as though I was no longer standing on the shore. The water reached for my feet, pulling me into its depths. I struggled, desperate to break free, but my legs felt paralyzed, refusing to move. In my panic, a voice echoed from within the pond, cold and echoing from the depths. "You are not allowed to leave." With a jolt, I forced myself back, wrenching my feet away from the water's edge. When I looked up again, the man's shadow on the surface was gone, leaving only the dark, still water as if nothing had happened. My breath came in gasps, my heart racing, but I knew I couldn't stop here. I had to keep moving, or risk being haunted by these spirits forever. I steadied myself, continuing past rows of headstones, my flashlight flickering over monuments etched with age. When the beam landed on an angel statue nearby, I noticed something strange. The eyes of the statue seemed to follow me, watching each movement I made in the darkness. I stepped back, but when I looked around, other angel statues appeared, all with eyes fixed on me. It felt as though I was surrounded by cold, stone eyes, judging and observing me with an intensity that made the air feel thick and suffocating. It felt as if hundreds of spirits had gathered around me. I picked up my pace, each step creating an odd echo, like footsteps that didn't belong to me. Then, amidst the soft rain, a strange voice called out. The voice was faint and eerie, as if drifting in from another world. "You shouldn't be here. You should have never come." I froze, the voice seeming to come from all directions, mingling with the rain and the wind. My flashlight flickered once more, then died completely, leaving me in absolute darkness. I could hear heavy breathing right behind me. It felt like a large, dark figure was looming over me, only inches away. With all the courage I could muster, I turned, but only endless darkness met my gaze. I spun back toward the exit path, my pace quickening as the echoes of my footsteps mingled with those of someone or something following close behind. But when I stopped, the sound continued, slow and deliberate, still pursuing me. At last, I reached the cemetery gates, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I glanced back one final time and saw a faint crowd of shadowy figures standing silently among the gravestones, their eyes glinting like ghostly lights, watching me intently. The angel statues around them also seemed to have glowing eyes, as if they had come to life to bear witness to the spirits who could never rest. I hurried to my car, my hands shaking as I slid the key into the ignition. As I drove away from the cemetery, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and those spirits were still there, standing by the gates, watching until I was out of sight. Back home, I found the black map lying on the table, but this time, there was no red writing. Instead, a new inscription had appeared, etched into the surface as if carved from stone. Cold and final. Boot Hill awaits. I collapsed into my chair, the fear still coursing through me. The spirits at Greenwood had let me go, but their empty eyes, the gazes of those angel statues, and the hateful voice still haunted me, and I knew that each step forward was leading me deeper into an endless nightmare. Boot Hill, Tombstone, Arizona. Just the name alone brings visions of the Wild West, gunslingers, and a world without rules. This place is a resting ground for outlaws, for souls who never found peace, forever trapped between this world and the next. Boot Hill is famously known as the cemetery for those who didn't die of natural causes but rather of stray bullets. I didn't know what awaited me here, but something deep inside told me that this journey was leading me ever closer to endless darkness. As I stepped through the gates of Boot Hill, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a blood-red glow over the stone graves. The worn tombstones stood crooked, some leaning, weathered by time and harsh elements, their inscriptions barely legible, marking the graves of those long forgotten. A cold wind blew through, carrying the dry scent of dust and earth, along with the restless sighs of the spirits still lingering here. The dusty path shifted under my feet with every step. Looking around, I felt the oppressive silence enveloping the cemetery. There was something unique about the atmosphere here, different from all the other cemeteries I had visited. Boot Hill wasn't just haunted by spirits but by vows of revenge and grievances that had followed these souls to their graves. Walking through the fading light, I began to hear a strange rustling sound. At first, it was faint, but it soon grew louder, like the steady beat of hooves approaching from a distance. My heart pounded in my chest. In a place as silent as Boot Hill, the sound of horse hooves was like a living nightmare. I looked around, trying to locate the source, but saw no one, and no horse. The sound of hooves echoed again, closer, louder, as though tearing through the stillness. Suddenly, I felt an icy chill behind me. Turning around, I saw a figure. He was a man dressed in cowboy attire, a long coat, and a wide-brimmed hat casting shadows over his face. His eyes were dark and hollow, his dusty hands gripping an old revolver. He stood motionless, staring at me with a gaze that seemed to pierce through to my soul. A look filled with hate and vengeance. "You're trespassing on our land," he said, his voice dry and cracked, like the moan of a tormented spirit. I was frozen, unable to speak. He raised his arm, pointing to the row of graves behind him. As I followed his gaze, shadowy figures began to emerge from the darkness, men dressed in cowboy gear, dust-covered, their eyes empty and filled with anger. They were the ones who had been killed, those who had lived and died by stray bullets, consumed by violence and hatred so deeply that their spirits couldn't leave this place. One by one, the figures closed in, forming a circle around me, their hollow stares full of bitterness and malice. A voice rose from the crowd. "You will not leave here." Just then, a strong gust of wind whipped up, swirling the dust around us like a whirlwind. Through the haze of dirt, the spirits stood unmoving, silent, their eyes burning with a haunting fire. They seemed to be pulling me into their world, a world with no escape. I turned to run, but their footsteps echoed behind me, slow and relentless. The cemetery became a maze, each path leading back to rows of graves, and every step only brought the spirits closer, trapping me in an unbreakable circle. Their silence was suffocating, their stares radiating a curse, a hatred that felt like it was pulling me into the depths of their restless afterlife. Just when I thought I'd never escape, I heard a gunshot. The blast rang through the night, and in the flash of light from one of the ghostly cowboy's guns, I saw his eyes, glowing red with rage, deep and terrifying. The shot wasn't meant to kill me but to warn me, a message from beyond that I had ventured too far into their domain. Panic surged through me, and I ran, each step feeling heavier than the last. Finally, I found the exit, gasping for breath as I stumbled through the gates, leaving Boot Hill and its spirits behind. But as I looked back, I saw dozens of figures standing silently, their eyes filled with hatred and judgment, as if casting a curse that would follow me forever. I climbed into my car, my hands trembling as I turned the key and sped away in fear. I didn't dare look into the rearview mirror again, but the fear only grew inside me, a feeling that the spirits of Boot Hill would never let me escape their haunting grip. When I finally returned home, the black map lay there on the table, waiting. This time, there were no red letters, no ghostly script. Instead, in the corner of the map was a small black ink mark of a coffin. As if to signal that my journey was reaching its end, I sank into my chair, trying to steady my nerves. The spirits of Boot Hill had issued their warning, but I knew I couldn't stop now. The ghosts from the cemeteries I had visited, every spirit I had encountered, were all pulling me deeper into a place where there was no way out. Calvary Cemetery, New York. After all the cemeteries I'd visited, Calvary was the final stop on this cursed map. No more blood-red warnings. No more ominous messages. Just a bone-chilling feeling that my journey had reached its end, and that the most horrifying encounter was waiting ahead. I arrived at Calvary late at night. The vast cemetery stretched endlessly beneath a pitch-black sky. Rows of headstones lined up under a shroud of darkness. I stepped through the gates in silence. The grounds empty and desolate, lit only by faint street lamps along the pathway. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the entire world had drifted into sleep. But here, rest was eternally out of reach. Every step I took along the path felt like it shattered the silence. Reverberating into the still night, tombstones, cold and looming, stood like thousands of empty eyes, watching my every move. It felt as though everything around me was alive, as though the ground beneath me was murmuring. Shifting deeper into the cemetery, I reached a large mausoleum adorned with statues of angels and crosses. Each statue with a sorrowful, haunting expression, wings outstretched as if to shield lost souls. My flashlight cast a dim glow on a weathered tombstone, the name etched in faded letters, unfamiliar yet stirring an eerie sense of dread. I stood before the tombstone, and suddenly, the air grew colder, a chill that pierced to the bone. A faint whisper arose from somewhere, distant yet intimate, like a call from the other side. "You've arrived, this place is yours." I turned, and shadows from the surrounding graves seemed to close in, forming a circle around me with no way out. In the mist, ghostly figures began to materialize, one by one, each face all too familiar. The White Lady from Bachelor's Grove, Marie Laveau from St. Louis No. 1, the Veiled Woman from Hollywood Forever, Resurrection Mary, they were all here, watching me. I froze, barely able to breathe. Every spirit, every ghost I had encountered, every soul I had inadvertently disturbed from eternal slumber, they were all here, gazing at me with dark, hollow eyes. Each face was a horrifying reminder of a journey I should never have begun. Suddenly, a tall figure emerged from among the graves. It was the man from Boot Hill, his wide-brimmed hat casting shadows over a face twisted with fury and sorrow from centuries past. He stepped toward me, each step heavy, breaking the stillness as he advanced. "You think you can escape us?" His voice boomed like thunder, dry and cold, echoing through the cemetery. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the ground. The other ghosts began to move closer, the circle tightening. Whispers filled the air, chilling laughter, haunting voices weaving together in a sinister chorus, trapping me in a swirling mass of vengeful spirits. "You will never find peace," a voice spoke from behind, icy and filled with bitterness. I turned and saw the White Lady from Union Cemetery, her face contorted with hatred and resentment. She reached out, her freezing fingers brushing my shoulder, her touch like ice seeping through my veins, paralyzing me with indescribable fear. "Everyone who steps into this graveyard is bound to it," Marie Laveau's voice echoed, her eyes glinting with a twisted smile. "You called us here, and now we will never leave." I screamed, but the sound lodged in my throat as dozens of cold hands grabbed me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. It felt like I was being drawn into an endless void, trapped among souls tormented by revenge. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, only the sensation of icy grips overtaking me, piece by piece. In my panic, I thrashed, desperate to break free from the spectral grasp of these spirits. A faint light appeared in the distance. I couldn't tell where it came from, but it was my only hope. I summoned every ounce of strength I had left and bolted toward the light, dashing past graves and outstretched ghostly hands reaching for me. Somehow, I made it out of Calvary Cemetery, stumbling through the gates, my body exhausted and my heart pounding. I clambered into my car, gasping for breath, speeding away without daring to look back. The darkness behind me felt as if it were chasing me, filled with whispers, laughter, and those haunting faces that wouldn't leave me alone. When I finally made it home, the map was still there, lying on the table. This time, it was blank, no red letters, no sinister symbols. It was as if every trace of that ghastly journey had disappeared. But I knew, deep down, that those spirits would never forgive, that their curse would be bound to me forever. I turned off the lights, sitting in the dark, my heart still racing, trying to shake off the horrifying images etched in my mind. But when I glanced into the mirror in the dim room, I saw them, those spirits, still watching, waiting, and I realized I had brought them home. The curse of these haunted cemeteries would follow me for life, and I would never escape their grip. The days after returning from Calvary Cemetery were a blur of terror and haunting memories. I lived in constant dread, afraid to sleep, each time I closed my eyes. The ghosts from each cemetery would flood my mind, empty eyes. Cold hands stretching from the darkness, trying to pull me into a place of endless shadows and no escape. Finally, exhaustion overtook me one night, and as I drifted off, my dreams transformed into an endless nightmare. In this nightmare, I found myself returning to each cemetery I'd visited. It began with Bachelor's Grove, where the silent figure of the lady in white stood, her pale, vacant eyes fixated on me, following my every move. Each spirit I'd awakened, each dark resentment I'd stirred, resurfaced in my mind. I ran from Bachelor's Grove, only to find myself at St. Louis No. 1, where Marie Laveau emerged from the darkness, her eyes glowing with a chilling smile. The scenes repeated over and over, like a horrifying loop. Spirits from Resurrection Cemetery, Bonaventure, and Greenwood slowly surrounded me, their eyes filled with a hatred that seemed to pull the very life from me. I tried to scream, to wake up, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The world around me plunged into shadows, and from within the darkness came a voice, soft but chillingly seductive. "You called us, and now, you must pay the price?" The whisper echoed like a curse, reverberating from all sides. I looked around and saw a faint figure appearing before me, the man from Boot Hill. His gaze dark and endless, as if it could strip away the last remnants of hope within me. He raised his hand, and instantly, the other spirits closed in, their freezing hands reaching out from the shadows, pulling me into a whirlpool of darkness. I felt as if I was falling into a bottomless pit, surrounded by the laughter and whispers of vengeful souls. I kept falling, endlessly, with no end in sight, and when I opened my eyes, I was back in my own bed, but the eerie feeling clung to me like a second skin. I jolted upright, looking around the room, and that's when I saw them. They were there, the spirits from every cemetery. Each one had a different face, a unique expression, but all were souls I disturbed. Marie Laveau stood in the corner, her eyes holding an ominous power. Resurrection Mary stood by the door, her empty stare filled with silent fury. The White Lady from Union Cemetery hovered near me, her dress billowing as if caught in an unseen wind. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it was just an illusion, but when I opened them again, they remained, staring, their pale faces, dark eyes, and grim smiles surrounding me, whispering their stories of suffering and hatred, lives stolen and cursed to wander deserted cemeteries. Backing up to my bed, my body trembling, I knew there was no escape. Every step I took backward, they moved closer, encircling me with the chill of the afterlife. I could hear Marie Laveau's laughter, the cold breath of the lady in white, and the agonizing cries of the souls I had disturbed from each cemetery. "You awakened us, and now there is no escape for you." A deep voice echoed from behind. I turned to see the man from Boot Hill, his wide-brimmed hat casting shadows over a face twisted with fury. "You belong to us now, and you'll stay with us forever." I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat. My room was dark, filled with the spectral figures and the spirits I'd accidentally summoned. I dashed from my room, bolting out of the house, but no matter how far I ran, their shadowy forms clung to me, pursuing me relentlessly. I stumbled into my car, speeding off into the dark night, not even sure where I was headed. Glancing into the rearview mirror, I saw them, ghosts filling the backseat, their eyes glowing like eerie lights from the depths of hell. I pressed harder on the gas, but the sense of being trapped stayed with me. Along the road, the cemeteries I'd visited appeared hazy on either side of the road like scenes from a nightmare. Bachelor's Grove, St. Louis No. 1, Hollywood Forever, Resurrection Cemetery, all merging into the road I traveled, and I realized there was no way to escape fate. Finally, I pulled over, exhausted, my heart racing with fear. I stepped out, staring at the empty road, only to look up and see them, the spirits standing in a long line, waiting, their eyes glowing through the darkness. Marie Laveau stepped forward first, her eyes filled with a power that demanded submission. "You cannot escape this curse. The summoner," she said, her voice thick with eerie authority. "You entered our world, And now, you will never leave. I no longer had the strength to run. I stood there, facing the fate I had unwittingly created, feeling the relentless pull of the spirits I had awakened. I knew my life would never return to what it once was. I had called them, and now I belonged to them. You've just completed the final journey of exploring the most haunted cemeteries across America. The spirits in this story may have found rest. But what other mysteries are still waiting for us to uncover? If you want to follow more horror stories and explore the supernatural world, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The mysteries will continue, and you won't want to miss them. Thank you, and see you again in the shadows of the next story.